Unit 4. Professional Approach and Ethical Issues. 4.1. Introduction. Dealing with clients and counselling the family is professional work. In practice, counselling must be carried out with a professional approach, adhering to ethical guidelines. This unit will help you understand the meaning of the ethical code of conduct and its principles. Applying ethical guidelines in counselling requires utmost sensitivity. Counsellors or therapists are often challenged to deal with questions or situations that have no clear solutions. One must think of all possible solutions, discuss them with colleagues, and decide how to act in ways that will serve the best interests of the clients. One way of resolving ethical dilemmas is to understand ethical and professional issues. This unit will help you understand these issues and provide support in making decisions pertaining to good ethical practice. Objectives. After studying this unit, you will be able to understand the meaning of ethics and principles of illness, know the application of confidentiality and informed consent, comprehend ethical issues in history-taking, assessment, and counselling of clients. Understand the role of ethics in carrying out research. Know the ethical guidelines for providing training to students and other professionals. 4.2. Professional Approach and Rights of Clients. Our professional relationships with clients exist for their benefit. A useful question that we, as counsellors or therapists, can frequently ask ourselves is, whose needs are being met in this relationship, my clients or my own? It takes considerable professional maturity to honestly appraise your behaviour and its impact on clients. We all have certain blind spots and distortions of reality. As helping professionals, we have responsibilities to actively expand our self-awareness and recognise areas of prejudice and vulnerability. If we are aware of our personal problems and are willing to work through them, there is less chance of projecting them onto clients. If certain areas of struggle surface and old conflicts become reactivated, we have an ethical obligation to seek therapy for ourselves so that we can better assist clients in confronting these same struggles. Personal power is a quality that every effective helping person possesses. It is a vital component of good therapy, and many clients improve as a result of sharing in the power of their therapist. One aspect of modelling is for therapists to be powerful persons. People who genuinely feel powerful do not dominate the lives of others or encourage others to remain in a diminished state to feel superior. They can appreciate other people's strengths and their own simultaneously. An impotent therapist may use clients in an attempt to achieve a sense of power. In contrast, a powerful therapist views the client's accomplishments and strengths as a source of joy. Consider also the counselor's need to nurture, which often attracts some students to the helping professions. These individuals may be inclined to teach people how to live the good life, straighten people out, or solve others' problems, all with the intention of being nurturing. Some therapists recognized at one point that they were miserable or wanted to make significant changes in their lives, and they successfully embarked on a journey of self-exploration. Such people may now deeply desire to help others find their own way, and in doing so, provide themselves with a sense of meaningfulness and personal significance. One aspect of therapists' need to nurture is their desire for others to nurture them through respect, admiration, approval, appreciation, affection, and care. The helping person quickly learns that the rewards for nurturing others are abundant. 4.2.1 Informed Consent. The therapist must obtain informed consent from the client regarding the therapeutic process to be used and disclose any confidential matter when necessary. 4.2.2 Confidentiality. The counsellor or therapist must safeguard information about a client obtained during clinical work, teaching, or research to protect the client's interests and prevent social stigma, discrimination, and harm. This should be treated as a primary obligation. Such information must not be revealed to others unless certain ethical conditions are met or when there is clear and imminent danger to an individual or society, and then only to the appropriate authorities or concerned professionals. Confidentiality of clinical records must be meticulously guarded, and the identity of clients should not be revealed even in scientific communication. No data about a client should be disclosed to any agency without the client's consent, or that of their family. 4.3 Definition and Role of Ethical Code of Conduct. Ethics is a code of moral standards of conduct for what is good and right, as opposed to what is bad or wrong. Ethical behavior is concerned with what is right or good in the context of governing moral codes. Ethical behavior is value-driven. Ethics is different from values, as values are concerned with broad beliefs about what is appropriate behavior. Reasons for various ethical practices. 1. Individualism view. Does a decision or behavior promote one's long-term self-interests? 2. Moral rights view. Does a decision or behavior maintain the fundamental rights of all human beings? 3. Utilitarian view. Does a decision or behavior do the greatest good for the most people? 4. Justice view. Does a decision or behavior show fairness and impartiality? Sources of unethical practice. The sources of unethical practice are discussed below. Structural determinants. These are often most directly related to systems of communication and consultation, transparency and accountability. Typically, modification of structure is the first port of call in organizational change. Structural change achieves little in the absence of cultural and behavioral change. Cultural determinants. These are the aspects of organizational style and rhetoric. They are often harder to modify than structural determinants, mainly because they are less readily identifiable and understood. These are essentially tied to the style or ethos of an organization's management and leadership, and are typically determined from the top, largely dependent on the example set by senior management. Behavioral determinants. These are aspects of individual character, conduct, and commitment. Behavioral determinants are much harder to address than structural or cultural determinants because they are based in personality and character. Behavioral determinants often stem from problematic features of character and conduct that are not recognized as such by individuals concerned. These are often related to features of character and conduct that are positively selected in many organizations and are encouraged by the organizational culture. The 4.4 Principles of Ethics. Ethical codes are basic guidelines that help counselors practice in a professional manner. These principles are like the basic foundation of the profession. There are 5 basic ethical principles that must be followed in practice. In simple terms, these principles are to benefit others, do no harm, respect others' autonomy, independence, be fair, and be faithful. Each of these principles is described below. Now 4.4.1 Beneficence. Beneficence implies accepting responsibility for promoting what is good for others. In counseling relationships, it refers to doing what enhances the client's well-being. When clients enter into a therapeutic venture, they do so with the expectation that they will benefit from the services. The interests of the clients and their health should stand paramount in professional practice. Personal interests should find but a secondary place. Financial arrangements should never contravene professional standards. Therapists should always safeguard the interests of the client and the profession. 4.4.2 Non-maleficence. Non-maleficence, which means doing no harm, involves the commitment of practitioners to exercise care in avoiding activities, such as situations involving conflicts of interest that have a high risk of hurting clients even inadvertently. The therapists must know that they bear a heavy social responsibility because they not only deal with disturbed human behavior but also contend with intimacies of life. As a scientist, they serve society through observation, investigation, experimentation, and well-planned and ethically carried out research. 4.4.3 Autonomy. Autonomy refers to the client's self-determination. It pertains to the belief that clients have freedom of thought and freedom to choose their direction. Counselors have an ethical obligation to decrease client dependency and to foster independent decision-making. This principle implies that therapists do not have the right to interfere in the lives of their clients by making decisions for them. Instead, counselors are charged with helping their clients think clearly and weigh the consequences of their actions. So 4.44 Justice. Justice refers to the commitment of counselors to provide equal and fair treatment to all clients. This includes doing what is possible to ensure that all people are given equal access to counseling services, regardless of factors such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, cultural background, disability, socioeconomic status, lifestyle orientation, and religion. This principle also refers to the fair treatment of an individual when their interests need to be considered in the context of the rights and interests of others. 4.4.5 Fidelity. Fidelity refers to making honest promises and faithfully honoring these commitments to clients. This involves a counselor's willingness to do what is necessary to create a trusting and therapeutic climate in which people can search for their own solutions. This principle involves being careful not to deceive or exploit clients. The maintenance of high standards of professional competence is the responsibility of all therapists in the interest of both the public and the profession. Therapists are responsible for their own continuing education and should realize that for them, it means a lifetime learning process. As members of the profession, they should not violate ethical standards and, when such violations come to their notice, should take steps to correct them. For 4.4.6, Cultural Determinants. Cultural context can determine ethical behavior. In each culture, certain principles may be difficult to practice. For example, in a study conducted by WHO, it was found that in India, client autonomy cannot be followed in all situations. A person from a rural background or with low education may lack knowledge about the advantages of counseling or psychotherapy. Consequently, they may not be able to decide whether to accept the therapist's suggestion to undergo counseling. In many situations, clients believe their counselor should decide about their treatment. Besides the basic principles of ethics, each culture can add certain ethical practices according to its needs. In India, there is a need for moral codes and expectations that align with the community they serve. Counselors should ensure their behavior does not malign with the community they serve. Counselors should ensure their behavior does not malign their profession. 4.4.7 Client Welfare. Counselors, therapists should not treat a case that does not clearly fall within their competence. Cases they accept should be treated with the best of their ability and with the highest regard for the client's integrity and welfare, as well as that of the communities in which they work. They should terminate the clinical or consulting relationship when it becomes reasonably clear that the client is no longer benefiting. In cases of referral, they should continue to feel responsible for the client's welfare until the responsibility has been formally transferred. 4.5 in history taking. Confidentiality. Counselors and family therapists should safeguard information about a client obtained during their clinical work, teaching, or research to protect the client's interests and shield them from social stigma, discrimination, and harm. This is a primary obligation, and such information should not be disclosed unless certain ethical conditions are met. Disclosure is acceptable only when there is clear and imminent danger to an individual or society, and even then, only to the appropriate authorities or concerned professionals. Confidentiality of clinical records must be meticulously maintained, and the identity of clients must not be revealed, even in scientific communication. No data about a client should be revealed to any agency without the client's or their family's consent. 4.6 Ethics in psychological assessment. Psychological tests are used in a wide range of situations, not just limited to clinical practice or child guidance clinics. The so-called IQ testing, widely conducted by psychologists, often results in labeling individuals. Testing has become a significant business, with psychological, educational, and personnel corporations selling thousands of tests each year. Children, both school-going and non-school-going, undergo testing to evaluate their academic performance and their capability to cope with the teaching-learning process. Psychological testing is also conducted to determine the suitability of certain career streams or courses. For instance, students aiming for specific professional courses, such as engineering or medical fields, or those planning to study abroad, often undertake aptitude and other tests. Testing is also common in employment, including recruitment, selection, and assigning personnel to specific roles or training. Additionally, personality tests are widely administered to draw profiles of candidates and determine suitability for particular roles. While it is important to match individuals to appropriate roles, It is equally essential that tests are not conducted as a routine practice or administered indiscriminately by unqualified individuals. Who should conduct psychological tests? Psychological tests should be conducted only by trained professionals with the competence to administer, score, diagnose, and interpret the tests. While countries like the USA and UK have state certification and licensing boards to regulate such practices, India lacks formal certification for psychology or counselling professions. Who decides when and what tests to administer? Many widely used tests in India, such as the CPK, APA, KBD, BO test, and CAT, are standardized in Western conditions, though some Indian versions of personality and IQ tests exist. The issue is not merely the choice of tests, but the manner in which they are administered. In many settings, psychologists act as technicians, conducting tests without proper preliminary investigation. For instance, in clinical environments, psychologists may be instructed to administer tests like the Rorschach test without conducting the detailed interviews that should precede such assessments. It is the ethical responsibility of professionals to thoroughly investigate the problem, determine if a test is necessary, and ensure the selected test is appropriate for providing better service to the client. Conducting tests without proper evaluation undermines the quality and ethical standards of psychological assessment. Let me know if you need any. In addition, labeling a client or subject as having a certain IQ, below average or otherwise, harms the person concerned in two important ways. It brings down the self-esteem of the individual, and it makes the family members of the subject use it as an explanation for many of the subject's behaviors which could otherwise be improved upon. This mindset created by labeling on the subject and her or his family members leaves very little scope for the individual to even make an effort to improve herself or himself. Thus, the important ethical issues to be considered are: A. Investigate the problem with a proper interview and not just administer a test indiscriminately. B. Decide whether a test is needed and, if so, which one should be administered. C. Avoid giving labels in the first instance, and avoid indicating the label in prescription slips or handing it over to the subject or her or his family members. Ethics requires that the subject and the family members be given a clear idea about the problem the subject suffers from, the possible remedies, where these may be available, and how much time it might take. And D. When such details are needed by another institution, school or clinic, the same could be sent by the professional who has tested the subject, with due explanations and her or his own assessment and comments. Such steps prevent any damage that may be caused to the individual by labeling and the revelation of the test results, which is generally beyond the understanding of the layperson. Ethical standards require the therapist to explain the test clearly to the subject, including its purpose, the type of assessment, and its reliability. Ethics also demands that when an individual is tested, every effort should be made to explain the purpose of the testing, the uses of the results, and the people or institutions who may have access to it. Test items within a test. Many tests, IQ or personality, have items such that subjects unfamiliar with them may require time to acquire knowledge about the same, become familiar with them, and learn the techniques for handling them. Unless these conditions are ensured, the response of the subjects to the test items can be highly misleading, resulting in labeling the subject. The same subject, once familiar with similar or related items, would perform far better than expected of an average person. Hence, the experience, competence, and integrity of the professional administering the test should be of a very high order, so that no person is labelled inadequately or inappropriately, thereby adversely affecting the individual's future and life. In this context, Anastasi 1988, Lanip and Goodstein 1982, and Sundberg 1977 have pointed out the inappropriateness of a test when it does not include a particular population sample while standardizing the test, leading to the problems mentioned above. Test materials and their distribution. Another important ethical issue related to testing is the test materials themselves. It is normally expected that only certain firms sell these tests, and only to professionals in the field. The individuals or institutions desiring to purchase a test should demonstrate their competence in administering, scoring, and interpreting the tests. Thus, the sale of tests should not be open to any user, but should depend on the user's qualifications. Such precautions are extremely necessary because monitoring violations of these restrictions is difficult, and the possibility of misuse of tests by untrained persons may cause more harm than good to the subject seeking help. As stated by Fars, 1992, even in countries such as the USA and UK, where these restrictions are systematically implemented, neither professional ethics nor publishers' restrictions are entirely successful in preventing the sale of tests to those who should not be allowed to use them. Standardization of tests. Another aspect of ethical concern is related to the standardization of tests. Ethics requires that tests are standardized under stringent controls and norms. Every test manual should contain normative data and instructions for administration and scoring, along with sufficient data to evaluate the reliability and validity of the tests. Even when a test is adapted to another country, such as India, ethical standards require, according to Oakland 1995, that every item, statement, question be answered by at least 10 subjects of the specific age-sexed category for whom it is intended. For example, a test with 40 items should be tried on a minimum of 400 respondents from that category, and standardization should be based on the data from these 400 responses. In India, such precautions are rarely taken. Tests in English are often translated into vernacular counterparts and used without proper pilot testing, or after trials on samples of fewer than 50 subjects. Ethics requires that tests adapted or translated into a regional language for a certain population be subjected to rigorous pilot testing before being accepted for use on the relevant Indian population. Test results, privacy and ethical aspects. As explained elsewhere in this unit, while the subject has the right to a full explanation of a test administered to her or him, she or he is also equally entitled to privacy regarding the test results. Ethics demand that the privacy of the individual subject concerning sharing or revealing test results be upheld. Without the subject's permission, test results should never be disclosed to anyone. Additionally, if any test, such as the MMPI or the Rorschach test, is administered as part of other tests or alongside certain other tests, the psychologist is ethically required to explain the relevance of these tests to the subject. Informed consent to the entire assessment process must be obtained, and subjects should be fully informed of their options. 4.6 Ethics in Psychological Assessment. During psychological assessment of the client, ethics should be strictly adhered to. The rapport with the client should be formed first before testing can be done. The reason and purpose of testing should be explained to the client, and the atmosphere at the time of testing should be calm and peaceful. The testing procedure should be followed. The instructions given in the test manual should be adhered to, and due to paucity of time, the test items should not be reduced if the test manual does not recommend the same. The analysis and report of the testing should be provided to the concerned client, and only after seeking written consent from the client may the same be disclosed to others. 4.7 Ethics in Counseling Therapy. Competencies. In therapies and interventions, one of the most important ethical issues is the competence of the counselor or therapist. Competence has several components. For instance, clinicians must always accurately represent their training. As mentioned by Piper and Davenport, 1990, subdoctoral clinicians should never make anyone believe that they possess a PhD. If a person is trained as a counseling psychologist, he should be presented as such. This also means that clinicians should not attempt to treat or assess cases when they have neither specific knowledge nor prior supervision in them. Whenever there are doubts about specific competencies, it is wise to seek supervision from more experienced professionals in the field. Fairs, 1992, 58. To the extent that a clinician has personal problems or sensitive spots that could affect her or his performance, the clinician should guard herself or himself against these while dealing with cases. As mentioned by Overholser and Fine, 1990, competence should be present in all aspects of clinical practice, including knowledge, clinical skill, clinical judgment, and interpersonal skills. Confidentiality. It is well known that clinicians have an ethical duty to respect and protect the confidentiality of client information. This is particularly important in the client-therapist relationship, where confidentiality is the central principle that binds the two into a relationship, guiding them through the therapeutic sessions. One of the important ethical issues is confidentiality in therapies and interventions. Many personal, private, conscious, and unconscious aspects of the subject emerge during the progress of the sessions. It is an accepted ethical principle that nothing of what the client conveys to the therapist should be shared with anyone without the prior permission of the subject. However, in Western countries with their advanced technology, computer programs and databanks, it becomes relatively easier for one agency to gain access to personal records from another agency or institution, thereby violating the principle of confidentiality. Although the information revealed by the client to the therapist is kept confidential and regarded as highly privileged, it is increasingly difficult to withhold the information. This is well illustrated in the Tarasov case, where the California Supreme Court ruled that information provided by a client during therapy cannot remain confidential or privileged if it indicates that the client may be dangerous. Similarly, information about employees in industrial settings is not always absolutely confidential. For example, insurance companies may enter the diagnosis of an employee's illness into computer records, to which many companies may gain access. Even after the informed consent of the subject for undergoing testing, ethics demands that the therapist obtains prior permission before revealing or sharing the test results with anyone other than the client. While clinicians have a clear ethical duty to respect and protect the confidentiality of client information, it is recognized that not all information can be kept confidential. For example, school records involving the assessment data of children are less than inviolate. As pointed out by Rubanowitz, 1987, certain areas such as child abuse, potential suicides, and homicides cannot be kept confidential. There are also cases where the client may be potentially dangerous, and the counselor or therapist may have to share the client's problems with her or his colleague. This sharing may occur with or without the consent of the client, Baird and Rupert, 1987. In this context, Pope and Vetter, 1992, p. 399, cited a case of a psychologist whose client claimed she was raped, but the police, knowing the mental history of the client from the psychologist, refused to register the case. Unsupervised interventions by trainee students. Along with the advantages of research, one also finds indifference to many ethical issues embedded in field-level research. For instance, student trainees are often asked to undertake such research without supervision. How they conduct a therapeutic session or administer a particular therapeutic package program is not known, potentially endangering and complicating the existing pattern of functioning of a client or subject. It is essential to have an ethical committee examine various ethical issues related to such unsupervised intervention research studies, especially those using therapeutic techniques with clients suffering from certain disorders. As pointed out by Imber et al., 1987, and Heflinger, 1987, ethical problems in such studies arise when one group receives the benefits while the other does not, as in trials where psychotherapy or drugs are given to a selected client group, while another group is denied treatment until its effectiveness is proven. This practice raises discrimination concerns in ethical issues. At the same time, therapeutic sessions conducted by untrained students and unsupervised sessions may cause considerable damage to the subject seeking help from the therapists. 4.8 Ethics in Psychological Research. Presently, one finds in a large number of research works in clinical and counseling psychology areas attempts to scientifically ascertain the efficacy of a particular therapeutic or counseling approach in handling a specific disorder. Research studies are extremely essential to refine, sharpen, and modify therapeutic tools and techniques, helping clients become asymptomatic. Such research studies have also resulted in the emergence and standardization of many new therapeutic techniques and packages. Many practitioners who have rich data available refuse to participate in research as they perceive a potential threat to their clients, Hardy 1995, Shipton 1994, Meller Clark and Shapiro 1995. Finally, the basic principle of such research concerns the rights of the person who may or may not want to participate in the study, informed consent. Such research work may, in certain cases, intrude into the therapeutic process, about which considerable precautions must be taken. Miera and Schmidt, 1991. The BCA, 1996, has put forward certain important guidelines for research studies in counselling in this connection. Fudging or plagiarising. While intentionally no researcher violates ethical guidelines, there are always marginal scientists who fudge data, take credit for the work of someone else, or plagiarise others' writing. Nedelson, 1993, and Tangri and Khan, 1993, referred to research on older persons and women, and the researchers' conclusion that age and sex have contributed to the problem being studied. They were of the view that a lack of grasp of the research literature on such subjects led researchers to attribute experimental effects to the wrong factors, age or sex, reinforcing stereotypes about the elderly and women. Inappropriate Professional Practice, the APA, 1993, in their report on ethical violations by professional psychologists in the USA, found that in 1991, 53% of cases involved inappropriate professional practices, ranging from testing abuses to inadequate handling of cases. By 1992, such violations had decreased to 32%. On the other hand, inappropriate teaching and research violations were only 8% in 1991, which decreased further to 6% in 1992. These violations included authorship controversies, inadequacies in supervision, improper and unsafe use of research techniques, and plagiarism. One inappropriate practice that has increased conspicuously is that of dual relationships, which includes sexual misconduct with adult clients, sexual conduct with minors, sexual harassment, and non-sexual dual relationships. According to the report, these types of ethics violations have nearly doubled since 1991. Wilson et al., 1996, p. 66-67. Ethical Principles for Human Subjects Research. The following are the ethical principles for human subjects research. 1. Planning and evaluation. In planning a study, the investigator is responsible for making a careful evaluation of its ethical acceptability. If weighing scientific and human values suggests a compromise of any principle, the investigator has a serious obligation to seek ethical advice and observe stringent safeguards to protect the rights of human participants. 2. Risk assessment. Considering whether a participant in a planned study will be a subject at risk or a subject at minimal risk according to recognized standards is a primary ethical concern for the investigator. 3. Ethical responsibility. The investigator always retains responsibility for ensuring ethical practice in research. They are also responsible for the ethical treatment of research participants by collaborators, assistants, students, and employees who incur similar obligations. 4. Informed consent. Except in minimal risk research, the investigator establishes a clear and fair agreement with participants before participation, clarifying obligations to honor all promises and commitments included in the agreement. The investigator informs participants of all aspects of the research that might reasonably influence their willingness to participate. Failure to make full disclosure before obtaining informed consent requires additional safeguards to protect the participants' welfare and dignity. Number 5. Special safeguards. Research with children or participants with impairments that limit understanding and/or communication requires special safeguarding procedures. 6. Concealment or deception. If methodological requirements necessitate concealment or deception, the investigator has a special responsibility to determine whether the use of such techniques is justified by the study's prospective scientific, educational, or applied value. Determine whether alternative procedures are available that do not involve concealment or deception. Ensure participants are provided with sufficient explanation as soon as possible. 7. Freedom to decline or withdraw. The investigator respects the individual's freedom to decline participation or withdraw at any time. When the investigator holds authority or influence over the participant, careful thought is required to protect this freedom. 8. Protection from harm. The investigator protects participants from physical and mental discomfort, harm, and danger arising from research procedures. If risks exist, participants are informed. Research procedures likely to cause serious or lasting harm are not used unless the research has significant potential benefit and fully informed and voluntary consent is obtained. 9. Contact procedures. Participants should be informed about procedures for contacting the investigator within a reasonable period following participation, especially if stress, harm, or related questions arise. 10. Debriefing. After data collection, the investigator provides participants with information about the nature of the study and attempts to address misconceptions. If withholding information is justified, the investigator assumes responsibility to monitor the research and ensure no damaging consequences for participants. Corrected text. Information obtained about a research participant during the course of an investigation is confidential unless otherwise agreed upon in advance. When the possibility exists that others may obtain access to such information, this possibility, together with the plans for protecting confidentiality, is explained to the participant as part of the procedure for obtaining informed consent. SWOL 4.9 Ethical Issues in Training Supervision. Postgraduate and above-level education in the field with specialization in the different areas aims to train students in the techniques and skills required for handling the varied problems manifested by the different groups of clients. This requires that the students acquire a thorough knowledge of the various theories and concepts, learn how to select tests, administer psychological tests, score and interpret them, possess knowledge of relevant literature, gain an orientation to the clinical and other settings in which they are planning to work after the training program, and develop the knowledge, understanding, and skills to make effective counseling and therapeutic interventions. Supervision is an important component in acquiring hands-on experience in the field. 4.10. In this unit, we have studied various professional approaches and rights of clients, in which we dealt with informed consent and confidentiality. We also learnt about ethics and the role of ethical codes of conduct. Principles of ethics, including beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, justice, fidelity, cultural determinants, and patient welfare, have been examined in this unit. We also learnt about various ethics in history-taking. 4.11 Code of Ethics, a formal statement of values and ethical standards. Ethical dilemma. A situation that, although offering potential benefits, is unethical. One of the most common ethical dilemmas occurs when a company's culture conflicts with an employee's personal ethics. Ethics training. It seeks to help people understand the ethical aspects of decision-making and to incorporate high ethical standards into their daily behavior. Utilitarianism. Seeking the greatest good for the greatest number. Whistleblowers. Persons who expose organizational misdeeds in order to preserve ethical standards and protect against wasteful, harmful, or illegal acts.